Around the world, weather poses serious threats and challenges for a number of industries. Our leading decision support tools and forecast insights help ensure safe, efficient operations. Get the data and insights you need for changing variables on your fields and around the world. A suite of sophisticated adaptive learning tools from DTN provides precise, reliable, around-the-clock insights to inform your decisions and boost your yields. And now, introducing Bryce Anderson.
Hello everyone, I'm Bryce Anderson, DTN Senior Ag Meteorologist. Thank you for this time during Commodity Classic to go through some key weather features ahead for this crop season and for crop seasons to come. You know, when we think about how we deal with weather and how we experience it, it is tempting to describe our weather experience with some kind of rhythm, maybe a familiar one like the waltz. But what happens when that music and when that rhythm stop? Well, we can have some real crop weather calamities that can end that ballroom gala very quickly. When the weather waltz is in tune, we find a west to east flow across the northern hemisphere that bring varieties of weather on a dependable basis. But in the past 20 years, that upper air flow has quite often become more north to south. It has shut the music off. And when that happens, we have seen some dramatic outbreaks of cold or heat and associated extremes of storms and drought. What's behind all that? Well, a very warm world with continued surplus energy to try to get out of the atmosphere somehow. In fact, the past year, 2020, was the second warmest year on record, with the average world temperature 1.76, 1.75 degrees Fahrenheit above the 20th century average. And the past 6 years, now they haven't been consecutive, but the past 6 years, 2015 to 2020, are the 6 warmest years on record. So there's a definite warmer feel in the temperatures, and the resultant impact that we see is what is called meridional flow, where there is a very strong component, not west to east, but more north to south. And for example, here in early February, a very strong surge southward of very cold air was a feature. And in contrast, then in the Pacific, there was a definite warm push to the north. We are seeing these occurrences develop, and when they happen, they are longer lasting features, and we are seeing those on a more frequent basis as we go through a given year. And we saw a real big example of that. Actually, several examples really complicate crop production and lead to some of the circumstances that we have in the markets during this past year, 2020. And I think that that's worth reviewing. There was a real trifecta, if you will, from this meridional flow in terms of impact on crop size and markets during the past year, 2020. This trifecta had drifting, derecho, and drought. Yeah, that was a real combination that caused some complications and, frankly, some reduced production in a notable fashion for row crops. Now, at the start a year ago, we had a lot of soil moisture, didn't we? In fact, in the Dakotas all the way to the Great Lakes, soil moisture levels were at a record in terms of the statewide precipitation rankings for the previous year, 2019. In early 2020, you had the soil moisture in the northern part of the Corn Belt and in the Delta and Mid-South. Yeah, that just about off the chart at record levels. A lot of moisture in the bank, so to speak, when we got into the crop year 2020. And along with that, it was a very problematic harvest from the year 2019 in the northern Corn Belt. In the state of North Dakota, a year ago at this time, 40% of the corn in North Dakota was still out in the field, unharvested. And, we didn't think about it. We discussed it then, but as we went through this crop season, this past crop year, 2020, there were some complications that developed and helped to reduce the acreage that we saw because, among other things, it took a long time simply to get that grain out of the field. And then prevented planting was an issue. North Dakota corn harvested acreage in the year 2020 had a 43% decline compared to the previous year at the very basic feature of putting a crop together for supply of whatever it might be, of whatever use you might have. There was a reduced acreage available to supply grain to the market. 43% decline in northern portions of the Corn Belt. Then in the month of August, you had a stagnant, very stationary, practically temperature boundary between cooler air out of the northern areas and a developing hot and dry pattern farther to the south in the southern plains and in the southern Midwest. And all of that came together to bring a hurricane wind event, the August 10th Derecho, roaring across the western into the central Midwest, but particularly focusing on Iowa, showing here some of the terrific damage that was done in central Iowa. The radar echoes were, again, just dramatically out of bounds in terms of their intensity during that Monday. Wind gust reports of, again, hurricane strength topping 100 miles an hour were noted across much of central into eastern Iowa. Along with that terrible wind damage, the last half of the summer season featured drought conditions that really focused on the west central part of Iowa, but there was drought throughout a lot of the western Corn Belt that just kept getting worse and worse, pretty much since the 1st of July across the western Corn Belt. And it was certainly the driest in west central Iowa. But across the Midwest, most of the growing season, 2020, was either warm to hot and dry. Average June to August temperatures in the Midwest were mainly from 1 to almost 6 degrees above average. That warmest was in some of the driest country in northwestern Iowa. And for the June to August time period, just about all of the Midwest had below average precipitation, and particularly kind of between Interstate 70 and US Highway 20 across a lot of Iowa, the northern half of Illinois, northern Indiana, Ohio, and then in portions of eastern Kansas and southwestern Missouri. Those precipitation totals were at least 75%, at least 25% or more below average. So warm and dry during prime time for crop development, as we know. Here's just one example of what things looked like when the grain filling stages were affected by drought in north central Iowa. The shrinking ears on the left-hand side of this picture showed the impact of grain trying to fill with no moisture to draw from. And in contrast, in the same field, if the moisture was better, well, the 3 ears on the right had a little bit better look to them, do they not? The state of Iowa had its 3rd driest August on record. Southwest Iowa, the driest August on record. And in the state of Illinois, August was the 13th driest on record. So that all started to make a difference when it came to the final harvest size, but it was hard to quantify exactly in late summer, but we knew it was coming, didn't we? Yeah, you could kind of feel it. And then you add in another impact, another meridional flow event, if I may. In the month of September, there was a very harsh cold wave that moved in. It took temperatures in the northern plains and the Rockies from over 100 degrees Fahrenheit to below freezing in just a couple days. In September 9th, there was a hard freeze in North Dakota and Minnesota. And then the weekend of September 10th to 11th, a freeze in Wisconsin and Michigan. Now, there was, of course, some late corn planting, and you saw an early end to the crop season in part of that northern corn belt. This all led to a harvest drawdown that was dramatic. From the earliest estimates in August, before the derecho and the drought started to make their way into our collective thoughts, so to speak, to the final USDA crop report in January. The August estimate for U.S. corn production, more than 15 billion bushels, we know that, with a yield that would have been a record by quite a ways of almost 182 bushels an acre. Soybean production, 4.42, with a yield of over 53 bushels an acre estimated. Then in the month of January, that final NASS report, we practically have it memorized, don't we? Corn, 14.2 billion bushels with a yield of only 172, almost 10 bushels per acre, I should say, 10 bushels per acre below the projections back in the month of August. Soybean production, 4.14 billion with a yield of just over 50 bushels an acre. That corn figure, 7% below the August number. And right away, there was 1 billion bushels taken out of production and, of course, out of any ending stocks number. Soybean production, 6% lower and effectively cutting things by 280 million bushels. Now, just as an example of how everything led to some real complications in the market, in the month of October, during what should be prime time for harvest, we saw the cash basis in part of the state of Iowa, where the derecho and drought had been most pronounced, reach levels that you wouldn't even think of during the month of October at all during harvest. Before the derecho in early August, central Iowa cash basis was 40 cents under the December contract. Now, in contrast, during the middle of harvest season in October 19th, that corn basis was only a dime under the December contract. Contributing editor Elaine Cubb and our grain bid manager Kathy Myers put this information together, and it shows truly what happened when that weather waltz stopped. And you could kind of even say that there came to be some just very discordant tones in the atmosphere that led to some complications in terms of supply and in terms of price when we got through the harvest of 2020. So an example from a year ago that bears noting. Now we look ahead to the year 2021. A big feature that we are all keeping track of is how the Pacific Ocean temperatures are going to get in the way, so to speak. Actually, there was some impact from last summer as well with La Nina conditions in the Pacific. In late January, early February, those La Nina or those Pacific temperatures were in a La Nina category at anywhere from 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius below average along the equator, west of South America, and around the international date line. The atmospheric features that help to kind of indicate how the jet stream is acting were at a La Nina level measured by the Southern Oscillation Index, the SOI. That value was in a moderate category on the 30-day scale at about a 14.65 or so in early February. Maybe not the strongest La Nina that we have seen in the past 10 to 20 years, but still certainly a moderate level strength. Now, what is La Nina impact overall in North America? We are starting to definitely feel that here in the latter part of the winter season with a pronounced colder trend out of the north moving into the north central part of the country. An active storm track from the northwest through the eastern Midwest, and dry conditions, high odds of a drier pattern in the southern plains and then through the southeastern part of the country. How do the forecast models look in terms of dealing with the Pacific temperatures from this late winter all the way through next summer. There's a little bit of difference, frankly. The U.S. model on the left-hand side of this graphic is in general showing La Nina continuing and perhaps going back to a moderate level after kind of edging toward neutral during the springtime, then sort of tailing off into more of a La Nina category by the late part of the summer. Now, in contrast, the Australia forecast model is showing a move to neutral Pacific temperatures and ocean conditions by late spring. So there is some model difference. I do want to point out that the U.S. model, again on the left-hand side of this graphic, the latest runs, the latest production of that model, indicated by the blue lines on the graphic, show a little bit more of a tendency to try to edge toward neutral compared with some earlier depictions. So that is going to bear watching. But in general, again, the U.S. forecast model does show a chance for La Nina redeveloping. And a compilation of all forecast model productions for Pacific temperatures measured by the International Climate and Research Institute call for La Nina to kind of back away, Pacific temperatures to get toward neutral during the springtime, but a chance for La Nina to reemerge in late summer and fall. And there's a little bit more than a 35% chance that La Nina could be back with us in late summer and fall. I bring all that to the table because there's a lot of caution that is worth keeping in mind when we think about how these Pacific temperatures are going to influence our weather patterns, notably with drier conditions in much of the Western Corn Belt and in the Southern Plains here in the latter part of winter. The IRI Spring Forecast is pretty much on the warm side across all of our crop areas, and of course very warm in the Southern Plains and then through the Southwest, with the precipitation showing somewhat of a variable tone, but you got a lot of southern areas still looking pretty dry during the springtime. That's with the yellow through the tan and the brown colors on this map. In summer, conditions for temperatures are primarily above normal. And then I want to call your attention to Iowa, Minnesota, west from the western edge of the Mississippi Valley, west all the way through the Central Plains. A lot of dry conditions still indicated in the summertime forecast. So there is not a real high probability at this point that some of these driest areas in the Western Corn Belt are going to get a whole lot of real benefit during this coming season. Our DTN forecast, dialing it in a little bit more to a 3-month time frame for the late spring, late winter into early spring, February, March, and April, keeps things on the chilly side for temperatures. That's on the left-hand side of this graphic with below normal values, anywhere from about 1 to possibly 2 or more degrees Fahrenheit below normal. And precipitation, some above normal in the Ohio Valley, but otherwise still quite dry. And there is a lot of caution, as I mentioned, about dry ground. The February, March, April timeframe, getting into early spring, does not offer much of a change in that regard. During the heart of the spring season, conditions maybe warm up a little bit over much of the central and the southern part of the country, part of the U.S., with the northern plains, northern Midwest, on into the Canadian prairies to have near normal temperatures. Precipitation has some above normal prospects in parts of the northern plains, especially over, say, an area from Bismarck, North Dakota west. And then in the Ohio Valley, the eastern Midwest, Great Lakes with above normal, but still below normal in the southern plains, and then along the Gulf Coast into the southeast. So during the springtime, we could have a real difference on moisture to the point that in the eastern Midwest, there could be some delays in terms of field work and planting progress. In the western Midwest and then through the plains, concern about dry ground. is likely to stay with us the way the forecasts are looking as we visit with you here. And then through the summer, or through late spring into summer, the temperature pattern is still pretty much near normal over the northern tier, with above normal from about Highway 20 across northern Iowa south to the Gulf Coast. Precipitation still has that wetter signal over the northern plains, maybe parts of the far northern Midwest, and then definitely above normal from eastern Iowa. Let's draw a line from Waterloo to Cedar Rapids and then go east of that. You go east of that area, we're looking at above normal, especially in the Ohio Valley Great Lakes. So there could be some wet conditions, again, getting into the way of getting field work done. But limited dryness easing in the western Midwest, and then obviously through the southern plains and south to the Gulf Coast, along with parts of the Northwest. We get into June, July, and August, right in the middle of summer. The summertime temperatures look pretty warm to hot, especially in the southern plains, from central Kansas south through the Texas Panhandle and into central Oklahoma, along with southeast Colorado. And precipitation, maybe some near normal in the Ohio Valley, Tennessee Valley, above normal along the East Coast, but over much of the remainder of the interior U.S., you've got a drier trend. To get into the key reproductive time frame for crops, and with that above normal temperature indication, that's going to hurt the soil moisture supply and affect crop moisture as well during soybean pod fill, during corn tasseling and pollination and kernel fill. And finally, getting into August, September, October, the end of summer into early fall, there is a mainly above normal temperature trend indicated, with a drier pattern across the Midwest and the South, and only a marginal change in the precipitation fortunes in the plains in the West. Maybe some possibility of near normal, but in general, below normal. And again, with the above normal temperatures, there's not a whole lot of effective soil moisture recharge that we can think about. I think this is a season when irrigation is going to be very active, and with irrigation as much in use as we're likely to see it, is that truly going to be a profitable year? Depends on the market, as we know, but there's going to be a lot of effort made just to kind of keep things going with this kind of a pattern. Drought concern is high right now. I'm not telling you anything new. It's going to continue that way, with severe to extreme drought in effect in the western Midwest and then in the plains and on west. The drought forecast from NOAA that's on the right-hand side of this graphic calls for continued or enhanced dryness west of the Mississippi. There is a chance for drought to ease and maybe even go away in the eastern Midwest, with that big difference in precipitation that we talked about during the spring season and on into the early summer. Now let's take a look at how La Nina is likely to affect South America to finish out the crop year. La Nina brings a stronger east to west wind out of the ocean into the southern hemisphere, and it also reduces the moisture flow into Argentina and southern Brazil when we see that effect really develop and really be a part of things. The La Nina impact in the Western Hemisphere in South America has high odds for a drier trend in southern Brazil and Argentina, elevated odds of a drier trend, I should say, in South Central Brazil. We've seen a little bit of an interruption in the South America rainfall pattern over the past 6 weeks, but it does appear that La Nina effect is going to kind of revitalize going into the end of their growing season and into the harvest time period, especially in southern Brazil and Argentina. Now, at this point, In Brazil, there's a difference because of recent rainfall in terms of drought conditions. Central Brazil in early February actually had drought in effect in Mato Grosso and then eastward all the way to the coast, and including Minas Gerais state, Goiás, and into Bahia. In contrast, south central and southern Brazil for a short time had a wetter pattern. And vegetation index values basically near to maybe a little bit above average. We're not just looking at a real lush crop situation in Brazil, but at least near to above average. It's not a real dry weather scenario. Argentina has a lot more variety. And first of all, on this graphic, I want to call your attention to the right-hand side, which shows a mixed vegetative condition. There are some pockets of central and south central Argentina where the vegetation has that kind of rust color to it, indicating some below average development. And there have been some reductions in the Argentina crop size estimate. There may be a little bit more before it's all done. Drought conditions have a notable contrast, especially because of some pretty heavy rains in central and north central Argentina during the last week to 10 days of January, with a fairly wet soil moisture profile in north central and central Argentina. But in contrast, southern Argentina, a lot of Buenos Aires into La Pampa, with a pretty harsh drought situation in effect. As we go through the end of the South America crop year for soybeans and then into the Safrinha corn year in Brazil, February, March, and April, that dry pattern has a pretty high likelihood of continuing or of redeveloping and strengthening in southern Brazil and Argentina, with a dryness hint in central Brazil. This is not a real bumper crop type of scenario that we are seeing to finish out their full season crops. March, April, May still have Argentina mostly dry, southern Brazil on the dry side, and then near to below normal for precipitation in the rest of Brazil. The Safrinha corn crop in Brazil is going to get a lot of attention, and rightly so, as we finish out this growing season for full season crops and then follow it up with the Safrinha corn crop. This is how things have just ratcheted upward in the past 20 years with the second crop corn or the Safrinha crop in Brazil. In the Safrinha states of Mato Grosso and Goiás especially, the Safrinha crop has taken off. And many millions of hectares have been devoted toward the Safrinha crop, and then more of the soy to corn not rotation but sequence has been noted. So there's definitely been an intensifying of the Safrinha scenario. A key feature to watch is when the rainy season in central Brazil comes to an end in Mato Grosso. The average end for the rainy season is May 4th in Mato Grosso. But in La Nina years, you could have that show a real wide variety, all the way from early April to late May. And in a year like this, when there is a slower start that we have seen to the planting of the Safrinha corn crop in central Brazil, this end of the rainy season is a key metric, a key date to keep track of. Looking a little bit further afield to finish things, looking internationally in Russia, there's been a lot of attention on how the snow cover pattern is looking. As of late winter, a lot of the Russia crop regions had near general snow cover with that depth anywhere from 11 to 40 inches, maybe a little bit less in South Russia, but otherwise the snow cover was pretty deep. March, April, May forecasts for Europe and Russia are looking pretty variable across Europe, nothing real dry. There is some drier trend in Russia, especially in the Volga Valley through the Caspian Sea and then on into southern Siberia. And farther into springtime, into early summer, there could be some dryness impact on the Russia wheat crop. A lot of Europe has mainly below normal precip and then much below normal indicated for that key South Russia wheat region. So as we summarize our main points for consideration at this time, there's a question on the duration of La Nina. There is also the likelihood that here in the U.S. across the Corn Belt, we could have a dry west and wet east contrast going into spring. Irrigation and water supply are going to be key details going through this growing season. There is a suggestion of a drier summer that keeps a lot of caution in place for soil moisture and caution about how South America is going to finish up. That's how the weather waltz maybe appears to be playing out for the crop season 2021. Thanks very much for joining us. And as always, I appreciate your interest, and it's great to visit with you about the upcoming crop year.